Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, August 27th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Congratulations, Matt. Your desideratum has occurred.
Thank you.
The engagement of Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift is upon us. Love is in the air. Permanence. Object permanence.
It's
very big.
I have predicted this engagement from the start, from the moment that the Travis-Taylor relationship was unveiled to the world in 2023, simply because this type of celebrity relationship has a logic to it. And when you're dealing with a star as big as Taylor Swift, whose entire career is based on her self-narrative, her autobiography, her growing into the world, her commentary on her various relationships, her struggle to regain the rights to her music, it just makes sense that the next step in her evolution would be marriage and family as she grows older. And so when it came into the news that she was dating Travis Kelce, I said, okay, because his life has a logic to it as well. He is, by many accounts, one of the greatest tight ends in the history of the National Football League. No small feat there, but he's coming to the end of his career. You know, tight end's a tough position. And so he has been laying the groundwork for what he's going to do by appearing in endless and endlessly annoying commercials, by hosting Saturday Night Live. I didn't watch, by his podcast that he does with his brother. And how else? How better to enjoy your retirement as an NFL athlete and superstar than to marry the billionaire pop idol Taylor Swift. So I am gratified today, John, that my prediction, my prophecy, if you will, has come to fruition. I will say the reaction from Taylor Swift fans is disconcerting. I heard a CBS reporter, I think, or an ABC News reporter, one of the first people to hear the news of the engagement, liken herself to Paul Revere. And I happened to be reading David Hackett Fisher's excellent book on Paul Revere, Paul Revere's Ride, which came out several years ago. It's a brilliant biography and story. This is not Paul Revere, but I do think it's another sign of
bigger than Paul Revere.
It's bigger. Yeah, right.
I think any podcast that is able to bring up David Hackett Fisher in relation to Taylor Swift has earned its pay.
It's just so well. Thank you to that CBS or ABC, that mainstream media, corporate media correspondent for putting the comparison in my head. Just final point. This is another sign, I think, of the revival of traditional culture that we have here. To very prominent people, including Taylor Swift, who is a feminist icon as much as she is a musical one, and she is getting married to a man.
Okay, well, so first off, the tradition of celebrity singers and actresses marrying sports guys has very long provenance. Obviously, Marilyn Monroe married Joe DiMaggio. The actress Lorraine Day married the Brooklyn Dodgers manager Leo DeRocher. And up to the present day, when a number of starlets in the 90s, CW starlets, Dawson's Creek type starlets, married hockey players. There was a whole...
You're skipping over Kathy Lee Gifford.
Kathy Lee Gifford,
Kathy
right?
Lee Singh?
Yeah. Oh, Kathy Lee was a singer.
At some
Yeah.
point, every Kardashian was married to an NBA player, right?
Right. So there's NBA players.
Mhm.
Halle Berry was married to David Justice. Like it's a whole long thing. So that's why yesterday on Twitter I said that my era would be the divorce album because
You're already going ahead to
I
that
am going ahead because
that piece of the
if this
discography.
is all part of the lifelong
Yeah.
tailored journey from innocence to experience, from teenage to adulthood, all throughout dealing with heartbreak,
Mhm.
heartbreak, puppy love heartbreak, young adult heartbreak, celebrity heartbreak, and all of that. We are going to have a divorce 5 to 10 years from now so there can be a divorce heartbreak album. That will be my album because I don't really have an era. You
Well,
know, that's the problem with the
here,
Eras tour. If you don't have an era, you really didn't connect
he-
to the Taylor Swift phenomenon.
this is why I disagree with you, because I think Happy Taylor Swift is one, more commercially viable, and two, more musically satisfying than Sad Taylor Swift. And I'll give you an example. Her past couple albums have been just dreary messes. The most recent one was like 32 songs long. It's unlistenable. They all sound the same. It's her kind of almost doing spoken word recording about how tough her life is, you know, as this billionaire rock star. And her next album, apparently, to coincide with the news of the engagement and all the wedding planning, is a return to form. Apparently, it's short, 12 songs, and they're all, and I use the term of art here, bangers. And so these bangers, these uplifting pop songs, that's, I think, is going to be a tremendous success. So she's going to have to ride that wave. I think that's why
I'm
I'm going to
not
be
saying she
contrarian
doesn't get
here.
the high. I'm
I think
not
it's
saying
going to
she doesn't
last.
get the high. She's going to
Yeah,
get the high. They're going to
right.
like marry in space or something and, you know, have the world's most celebrated baby since Lilibet.
Yeah.
But the life journey of the celebrity marriage is not, there have been
No.
3 or 4,
They want to
Paul
be
Newman and Joanne Woodward.
Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson. That's what
Okay.
Taylor and Travis should aspire to.
But remember, Rita Wilson was never a challenge to Tom Hanks'
Yeah.
supremacy. The only real marriage of equals in this sense in the world of celebrity, as far as I know, was Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. She won an Oscar when she was 25. He didn't win an Oscar until his late 50s. She was one of the most celebrated or respected actresses of her generation. He was the biggest male star of his generation. They weren't in competition with each other, and they had this long and happy marriage.
But
I don't
He
know.
was a much bigger. He was a much bigger star than she was.
No, but she won an Oscar, so
I know,
she
yeah.
had the Oscar, and he didn't have the Oscar. So they had a nice.
Where do we?
Mel
Where do we?
Brooks and Anne Bancroft, same thing. Young
That's a good.
Oscar.
Where do we rank Jay-Z and Beyonce here?
yeah, they're still together.
Well, that's a merger.
They're all
That's
mergers.
that's a merger. I don't know what that. Okay, fair enough. I'm just saying that you generally also. So those are performers marrying performers. Kelce is transitioning into being a performer.
Right.
Or he is
Well,
setting up.
we
himself
should say
as
we
wildly
haven't
successful.
spoken about Kelsey's musical talent, but Travis and his brother for Christmas, I guess it was last year, a couple years ago, covered the Pogues' Fairy Tale of New York on their podcast. They did I think it was a Philadelphia version, and so maybe
Yes.
there's an
God.
album ahead.
There
for
you
the
go.
Kelce.
But he
save
is
us.
a wildly successful podcaster. I believe they sold their podcast rights for around $100 million. So he is actually making a transition into post
Yeah,
post
this could be
field
his last season.
life, right? And the transition is uncommonly smooth. He doesn't look like he's going to do what everybody else did, which is become a sports cat. I mean, his primary focus is going to be being a bro, a sort of sports bro on a podcast, literally a bro since he's there with his brother. So that question of the marriage where one person outshines the other, which is often a real problem and often a real problem for men, may be dealt with in this fashion. I'm just saying one should not presume that what we are
I
going to
wish
see
them
here.
I wish them great success and happiness. I think the conflict is mitigated by the fact that they appeal to such different audiences, and the real trouble has been the past couple years with the merger of the Swifties and the NFL. And as a NFL super fan, as you know, I grow very tired of having the cameras cut to Taylor Swift after every single Chiefs
Chiefs play.
touchdown. Yes, and
Yeah.
so that will end, and she will go and do her musical career. He will go and be his podcaster, Pat McAfee type, and I think that will be fine. And the have the baby and everything. And yes, maybe they'll get divorced. I don't want that. You know, we saw that recent statistic that showed that marriages happening now among this demographic cohort, if you get married, which
Yeah.
is not that common, but if you get married, you actually have a tremendous chance of sticking together. Now, maybe that doesn't apply to people
Well, there are
at the
two things that
very
maybe
upper tail, but you never know.
there are two things about that. One is a really remarkable survey by YouGov that found that young married people are wildly happier than
Yeah.
young single people. Now, this, by the way, is interesting to note because historically, happiness surveys have shown, and this has always been a problem for the conservative case for marriage, that if you ask people, has having children or being a parent or what, which of course is an offshoot of marriage, let's say, but not necessarily, but being married and having children, has that increased your level of happiness or decreased it? That people are more likely to say that it has decreased it than increased it, and no one really knows why. Our friend Arthur Brooks, former head of the American Enterprise Institute and happiness scholar, was very hard pressed to sort of explain. He said basically,
Future
life
Dalai Lama.
right, yeah, but life gets way more complicated
Right.
when you have a spouse and children, and grief and worry and anxiety can wildly increase, and so the fantasy of being unburdened of your connections might, in these earlier surveys, have been the reason why people who are married say they're not as happy as people who are unmarried.
But I have a theory about that, and
But
that is
before you get
that
to the theory,
yeah.
things have shifted. There is this totally acknowledged mental health crisis among people from the ages of about 12 to about 30. And it is without precedent, particularly since, people aren't coming back from war and having PTSD and that sort of thing. And so people now are much more inclined as singletons to say that they are unhappy than they used to be. Maybe defiantly, they used to say they were happy as a way of dealing with the fact that they weren't married. And married people would say they were unhappy as a way of dealing with the fact that they hadn't gotten everything that they wanted out of marriage. But that is not what the data are showing now. The data are showing now that connection is so crucial to just simple day-to-day well-being, that not having serious connections like that is having a terribly adverse consequence on people's spirits. So in that sense, if Travis and Taylor somehow convince people to give it a shot, to be together rather than to be alone, to be a couple rather than to be a single, to be connected rather than be disconnected, maybe that will be a good cultural thing.
Before we get to Seth's theory, which I want to hear, I just want to say we have these two incredibly successful, good-looking people getting engaged on the same day that we won the war against Cracker Barrel. And there's nothing to me that better represents the American revival that's happening here, the end of wokeness, that if we just keep fighting. But that's for another time. Seth.
Yes. Yeah, no, essentially the Cracker Barrel thing was Yeltsin standing on a tank. They tried. and Cracker Barrel, stood on a tank and
American
we held on to
Glasnost.
it.
America stood on
That's
the
right.
tank. That's right.
America stood on the
And
tank. That's right.
said, "You are not moving on Uncle Herschel." Which, by the
That's
way,
right.
that's the name of the guy.
Well, he was in
old
his
man in the
dacha
chair.
out on the Black Sea, and
Uncle Herschel.
Herschel. Uncle Herschel. What
Yeah.
with the Uncle Herschel?
Remember
That's
Krauthammer's
my
law. Everyone
what?
is Jewish until proven otherwise.
My
Uncle Herschel, member of
grandfather.
the tribe.
My grandfather was Herschel.
Yeah.
This was very surprising that his name
well,
was
there's
Uncle
also
Herschel.
Herschel Walker. So
I know there's Herschel. I understand that, but Herschel is already. He doesn't look like Herschel Walker. Let's just say that. He doesn't really look like my grandfather either, but he looks more like my grandfather.
He
than
doesn't really
does
look like anything
Walker.
since he's a
Right.
silhouette.
Yes. Okay. Yes, please.
Yeah. No, my
Sorry.
theory on the marriage and happiness thing is that you getting married and having kids is coincides with getting older. And I think that there's an element of
Well-
what they used to call adulting, right? The forever teenagers, the permanent adolescents used to say like, "Oh, I'm adulting," right? Hashtag adulting. But that their concern was that it's adulting is not fun or whatever. There's all this responsibility. You get older, you have all this responsibility. It's not even necessarily that there's something about marriage and family. I think people are, also thinking about the fact that they threw their back out when they sneezed and things like that. I just think there's a progression to life that makes people, that's, a bit more tired, a bit more responsibility, a bit more stress
But it's
as
not,
life goes
it's
on.
not linear. It's not linear. And this is important because Jonathan Rauch actually wrote a whole book about this, where he noted that people do report when they're married with kids a decline in happiness because of what you're saying, getting older, adulting, raising kids is not easy. But then later in life, they actually recover and they become even more satisfied with their life outcomes. So it's a dynamic process. I think what's interesting now is that in the earlier surveys, John mentioned, the single population was relatively small. Most people were married. And the swinging singles, the cast of Friends, even the Seinfeld neurotic yuppies, they were kind of a minority, and they were dating and living their lives into their 30s. Well, now everyone's single practically, and dating is very hard.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
my.
that type of life is not as enjoyable as it was even 30 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing in the switch in self-reported happiness and satisfaction among young marrieds now is because outside of marriage, if you're single, where is the connection? There used to be connection in the world among friends and colleagues and whatever. Now everyone's where are they? They're on Zoom. They're on their phones. They're behind. By the way, masks I've seen come back. I'm guessing because of this New York Times article that COVID is back. So the degree of isolation outside of marriage is enormous now.
Yeah.
It used to be that we had a much more social world decade or so back.
COVID sped that up. COVID really blew that up. I mean, we had, I had younger employees who were like, at the beginning of COVID, like, this is great, let's work from home. And then at some point I heard from, and from friends who were, a decade younger than me, I would say, hey, how's it going? And they would say, I can't play Call of Duty anymore. I can't be paid to play Call of Duty anymore. I thought it would be the greatest thing that ever happened to me to be paid to stay home and play Call of Duty, but it's actually miserable. So like COVID really sped this up because you got a taste of it. Okay, here you go. Here's total freedom. But total freedom, especially during COVID, was sitting in your apartment alone.
I mean, it's a very complicated problem. You talk about, it making you an adult, and the big shift, one of the maybe the most important cultural shift of the 1960s, though the least commented on, was the shift in emphasis from being a grown up to being a kid. And it was partially the result of the baby boom and partially the result of all sorts of stuff, but that the culture began to be driven by the young rather than the middle-aged. That entertainments, novels, ads, television shows, all of this were increasingly being made to appeal to and cater to this gigantic demographic born after 1946 that, reached its 20s in the 1960s. And that this was an unprecedented thing in the history of culture, and everything shifted to the pleasures of youth, right? Which are sowing your wild oats, being unencumbered. You can be whatever you want to be, try different things out and all of that. That was not what it was like to be young before the 1960s. It was like you were in your parents' house, you graduated from high school, mostly. A lot of Americans went into the military, and when they came out, they immediately got married, or they got married before they went in, came home, had kids. The entire society was structured to make life easier for them. GI Bill, mortgage, Levitt towns, the construction of an entire world of housing for them to move into as adults, and all of that. And the idea was, it was good to be older. It was good to be married. It was good to have killed. This is what everybody did, and that it wasn't even adulting. Like, there was no such thing as being a kid. Like, you were a kid, and then game time was over, and it was time to be a person. And then the definition of what it meant to be a real person. Then you have 40-year-old men envying 20-year-old men and divorcing their wives and buying sports cars and doing this sort of middle-age, midlife crisis thing at one point. And then that shifted as the generations moved on. Women became sort of a bigger force in the workplace, had independent sources of income. Suddenly they're married 20 years and they're like, I don't like this. I didn't mean to be locked down to this one guy for the rest of my life whom I don't necessarily like. And I married because I was young and foolish. And now I can get out of it because I can support myself. And so all this idea of, what's best is to have the freedom of choice that is necessarily limited by connection, which limits your choice, your freedom of choice. If you're connected to your family, you have obligations to your family, your parents, you're expected at dinner on Sunday, or, Sunday lunch or Friday night dinner or whatever. And all of that shifted. And that's where I think, if you want to get back to Travis and Taylor, though I don't think this is really a full connection in that sense, that that people began to feel like they'd been sold a bill of goods, or that COVID showed what it was going to be like to live a life of real lack of connection, in which most connections were made over a screen, in which conversations were by text and not by voice, in which encounters were virtual and not actual. And that after 5 years of that post-COVID, or even the 5 years before that, before COVID, that there's been a net decrease in contentment. And then, of course, you have liberal politics, where we do have these polls that suggest that the message that liberals convey to each other about the world, America, the environment, global warming, war, all of that, injustice, has led them to be depressed. Yeah. They have no hope for the future. They don't see that. They don't feel optimistic. They don't think that things are gonna get any better. Well, and so there is a kind of perfect storm of things here.
This flight from responsibility and commitment was a major theme in the work of a young, promising writer who's featured on the Free Press this morning, a man named Norman Podhoretz. Perhaps you've heard of him in one of his great works, Breaking Ranks, which should be republished, along with Making It, which was republished about 8 years ago now, by the New York Review of Books. He talks about this huge chasm between the new liberalism that he saw in the 1970s and the neoconservatism he came to adopt, which was its attitude toward commitment and responsibility. And so it's nice to see people revive the idea of commitment between a husband and wife. I have an exit question here, though, which is, do we think the wedding will be televised?
No.
I think it has. You don't think so? I think it has to be. I think it's going to
He
be
is
the
too
biggest
big a
wedding,
star.
the biggest wedding since Tiny Tim and Miss Vicky. You put it on. We don't have the late night shows anymore. Trump ended that, but we'll do a Netflix special. That's what we're going to have.
Definitely not.
I don't
think so.
Oh,
I
She
don't
is
think so.
too big a
I
star.
think people will be people have their camera phones out at there'll be like a red carpet section where we will see like everybody showing up to them, you know.
I don't think there'll be that
I don't think
either.
it's going to be
You
because
think it'll be
I
small?
We don't
remember
know
like
when they got engaged, by the way. Important to note that the photo was released and she put out this Instagram saying we're engaged and showed the ring. Not clear that it was yesterday at all. Like
they might
could have been
already be
engaged
married
for
with
3
kids.
months. Yeah. I mean, oh, by the way, another interesting tell, though it's weird because it has weird valences with 21st century weirdness, is that the Millie Bobby Brown, the star of Stranger Things, the biggest star created by the streaming era, got married at 21 to the son of John Bon Jovi. She's 23, I think, and they just adopted a baby.
yeah.
So they are the most prominent young couple in showbiz. I would say the most prominent, very young married couple in show business.
She's 21.
One thinks of her. She's 21, right?
Yeah.
And one thinks of her as a kid because we watched her being 11 on Stranger Things 10 years ago. And they had a baby. Now, they didn't have a baby. She didn't get pregnant and have a baby. They adopted a baby. But there you have and John Bon Jovi, by the way, this kid, Bon Jovi, who's, I can't remember his first name, his parents have been married for 40 years. Like, that is a stable rock and roll marriage, of which there are, one of the interesting tells of some of these stars, is that some, like he and Sting and a couple of other of them, like they did settle down.
Bruce and Patty.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, in New Jersey, we have values.
Yeah, but they've been together for a long
Jersey
time.
values.
You have values, and you have.
But can I say
oil
something?
refineries
We're talking about these celebrity choices as if they reflect or are connected to what ordinary people do. I don't think
you know the motto? Celebrities, they're just like us.
Right.
No, Abe, I honestly think you're mistaken about this. That
Okay.
Matt is right that people are cattle and they follow cultural trend lines. And if Taylor Swift is getting married, that makes getting married thinkable to a great many people. You would be surprised at how many
she's
people
part of a
spend
trend.
hours every day thinking about Taylor Swift. Millions of people.
We'd be disturbed.
I mean, celebrity, but
Well, we think about the Roman. I gather that we men do nothing but think about the Roman Empire. Remember that story last year?
Oh yeah, that was a big one.
At the forefront, no man goes through a day without
Apparently
thinking about the Roman
not.
Empire, which is interesting since I've spent many years not thinking about the
Same
Roman
here.
Empire. Yeah,
but I mean,
okay.
but
apparently we are in the
celebrities get married and divorced all the time. That's what the tabloid industry is. I mean, this isn't like
think
Halley's Comet coming around.
But I think it's a generational thing, Abe, and I'm just going to add one more element to this equation, and that is the shift among young people, Zoomers in particular, toward the right. And we saw it in the election. We're continuing to see it in polls. There was a poll out just in the past week that showed that the Zoomers are one of the most conservative generations in decades. Article in the Washington Post today about how young conservatives on campus are breaking out the Reagan Bush 84 T-shirts. I think there is something changing in the zeitgeist among younger people. Now, Travis, Kelce, and Taylor Swift are older. They're millennials, but they could also be part, I think, of this cultural drift. And so I know that I gave that the exit question, but there's one other element here, which is, as we know, Brittany Mahomes is a MAGA mom, and Taylor, she affiliates with the left, and so the real tell will be if she depoliticizes as a result of this marriage.
She is as apolitical a person who identifies with the left as anybody
That's
ever
true.
has.
Yeah,
Remember,
she's. I mean,
began as a
she's Michael
country.
Jordan. She's Michael Jordan,
Yeah,
right? Michael
she's
Jordan
very
was
that's right.
famously asked about the politics, and he said Republicans buy shoes too, buy
Yeah.
sneakers
Remember,
too.
there
And
was a
Jordan came under a lot of
desperate
fire.
right.
LeBron James was compared favorably to Jordan in all that. This was supposedly a huge negative on Jordan's career because he
Yeah.
was famous in a way that athletes weren't really that. He was like Michael Jackson famous. He was
Yeah.
world famous for an athlete, and they said you did nothing with it. And Taylor Swift, man, at the beginning of the Gaza war, you want to know how many tweets I saw that said Taylor Swift could end this with a tweet?
Yeah. No, and there was all that, she began as a country singer. I mean, her valence was that she was a rural kid, and that she began as a sort of country singer who then broke out into pop. But yeah, there was this huge effort to sort of enlist her in the 2024 campaign, first for Biden and then for Kamala, and she
Well, she did do.
resisted. Did she? Wait,
I think she did endorse Kamala because that's why Trump said, "I hate Taylor Swift."
oh,
I think so, but it was like an afterthought.
Yeah, she
Okay.
endorsed Harris in a post signed childless cat lady, September 11th, 2024.
oh, okay.
So yeah, that's what I mean. So
but it was late.
Trust me,
I know.
I get into Chiefs
I know.
Kingdom pretty deeply. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we'll see. Is this going to be a
Right.
continuing story here beyond
Right.
the engagement and the wedding?
But by the way, you can't have a massive cultural shift without on one side of the political ledger. By which I mean,
Right. That's
it,
true.
It will be a mark of change if liberals get over their solipsistic depression and this concentration on the self over all other things without changing their politics necessarily. Now,
Yeah.
I think we think that in the end, those things are indivisible over time, but they're not. I mean, people do say, like, I want universal health care. They'll still say they want that, that, or I want climate change legislation or whatever it is. But the notion that if we want, and now we can get to Cracker Barrel a little bit, if we want the world to change in a direction in which human flourishing and the possibility of living a good life for people is made easier and more practical, and that will make America genuinely great again in that sense. We have to be willing to let liberals have it too, without saying, well, if you feel this way, you need to vote. You need to vote for Winsome Sears. Like you can still vote for Abigail Spanberger, get married, have children, go to church, and it's going to be harder because of some of the cultural things that we can talk about after we talk about Cracker Barrel.
Well, there's a perfect lead into Cracker Barrel because the Democrats' Twitter feed tweeted, "We also hate the rebrand."
Okay, see, that's how significant a mistake this was. And I want to know, are we talking about, I think what's great about this is not the fact that, conservatives fought back and they took it to a corporation, the corporation bent. Like, it would have been insane for Cracker Barrel not to bend. Nobody was asking them to rebrand. It wasn't a necessary fulfillment of their contract with so-and-so. They had to rebrand. They decided to do this unilaterally. There was this massive public response that was negative, and the wise thing to do was, before you commit fully to this new thing, you say, okay, oops, we back off.
And their stock plunged too.
And right, exactly. So here's my question: is what's important about this, that this is an attack on wokeness, as Christopher Rufo says in a City Journal piece that is him taking a victory lap and saying that he's basically responsible for this? Or is this a fantastic moment for Americans, and particularly for a certain type of, I don't know, upper middle class American, to say, you think that these kind of mediocre corporate chieftains that run these increasingly irrelevant companies that don't really have it's okay to think they're morons. Don't think that the CEO of Cracker Barrel is smarter than you. used to say 40 years ago, well, look, somebody got to be CEO Cracker Barrel. I mean, got to have something on the ball to have climbed to the top of the greasy pole and made it into, running an important consumer products company. And I'm more like, every time I turn around, one of these companies is doing something so dumb that this is where
I don't think people have had faith in business executives at least since the financial crisis in 2008, possibly since Enron in 2002. So
Okay.
I think this is.
I don't mean I'm maybe I'm not being clear, because of course you're right, and nobody believes in anything anymore. They don't believe in corporations, and they don't like.
Yeah.
But they like things, and they like the products that corporations produce, and they do identify.
People are small C conservative. They like things the way they are, and there was nothing, as we were talking about on the show on Monday, there was nothing wrong with the logo. There is nothing wrong with it. They just decided to change it, rebrand it in a way that made it less distinctive, more corporate, more conformist and boring. And I think people responded by saying, "What are you talking about?" For me, the lesson is that there was accountability. There are limits to this type of corporate declarative engineering. That 10 years ago, a corporation could have not only just changed the Cracker Barrel logo, they could have turned that sign into a rainbow flag. And there would have been angry conservatives, but nothing would have happened. And the message from the president of the United States, one Barack Hussein Obama, would have been, well, that's just the way it is. Now, no, it's not the way it is. You even try to get rid of Uncle Herschel, and people are going to come and say, what are you doing? Stop it. And the corporation responds.
But okay, I have a totally different takeaway from this, which is that the reason this all unfolded the way it did, I don't think is necessarily because people are more conservative. I think it's because what the whole thing shows is that the American people are eager to fight about anything and to politicize everything. I don't know. I still don't know why this was a story. I swear to you, I don't get it. I don't think it was a woke change. The fact that someone picked up on it, spun it into this political tale, is to me sort of extraordinary media phenomenon. That's what I can't get over. I think there's
your animus toward Cracker Barrel runs so deep.
It's
have you announced that you actually have been
Abe
to a
must
Cracker
correct
Barrel?
the record.
Yes.
Oh,
Abe
yeah.
said on Monday he's
Will
never
you
been
correct?
to a Cracker Barrel.
Yeah.
Please correct.
And then it turns out my friend who listens to the podcast texted me and said, you went to Cracker Barrel with me twice 20 years ago. I said, when? And he's got a good memory for certain things, and he actually told me both times and location. I said, okay. But okay, I didn't remember it. I have no animus toward Cracker Barrel.
Clearly, you've repressed your memory of it for some reason.
What happened at Cracker Barrel?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to split the baby between Abe and Matt on this matter. It's ridiculous that Cracker Barrel becomes a political correctness fight. But it did.
Lunacy.
You see, it's ridiculous that it did, but it did. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why? So, Abe, your answer is because everybody will fight about everything. And I think that's true, that everybody will fight over everything. But some fights don't catch and some fights do. And the very fact that the stock price was affected means that the fight caught in this case. And as I said on the podcast on Monday, my feeling was that it was for conservatives an invasion of their space. And that this is the thing, like, you will never, and this is, what was it that Rod Dreher called it like 10, 15 years ago? The law of merited impossibility, which is like, liberals want to make a change. And you say, well, you know what? If you say that there's going to be gay marriage, then everyone is going to be trans, and the people say, no, this is just about gay marriage. How dare you say that it's about anything? Love is love, and this is not about, it's about its own thing, and this is all it's about. And then it turns out, no, it's a window, it's an opening of a window or opening of a door into more radical action. In the case of something like Cracker Barrel or something like that, this came after years of assaults on things that made, to the corporate mind and the C-suite at Cracker Barrel, made them think that the meta message that Cracker Barrel was sending was unattractive and needed to be spiffed up, that it was alienating, not welcoming. And conservatives were like, it welcomes me. I like Uncle Herschel. I didn't even know his name was Uncle Herschel, and I like Uncle Herschel. I look at the Uncle Herschel sign, and I like it. Don't take it away.
Well, but here's where I think Abe is right, though, because there's an element of this that is, it doesn't matter, and nobody really cares that much, which is why it's outrageous to go and change something, right? Why, if you suspect that this, whether you think it's woke creep or whether you think it's just condescension of the South, which a lot of people, think this is sort of condescension towards the South, there's no reason to do this. It feels gratuitous. It feels like wandering the battlefield, shooting the wounded, salting the earth. And so the fact that no one should care about this is why people care about this. What on earth could you possibly have reason for to come in and change Cracker Barrel?
I just want to add something to what John said. John, you said some fights catch and some don't. I'm not sure some don't anymore. I think every fight catch. I think you could make a fight out of anything now. I think it was someone, you can find someone or some critical mass to get worked up over any invented controversy.
I think
by overlaying it with the slightest political frame.
My takeaway from John's remarks is that the slippery slope is real, and what the right is beginning to do is tilt the angle of the slope, so that for decades the slippery slope just ran downhill toward the left. And beginning with the Dylan Mulvaney fight, the Bud Light fight, some of the other fights during the Biden era, Cracker Barrel's part of it too. Though, as we pointed out, there were also allies on the left, liberals, who thought that this was totally superfluous and slightly odd and condescending. But you're beginning to take that slope and kind of build up ground, change the angle so that it's not just running in one direction. And I think that's important.
Okay, I'm going to give you an example of a fight that's not going to take. This morning, or last night, Sean Duffy, the transportation secretary, announced that the Trump administration would be taking administrative control over Union Station in D.C. For the last 40 years, Union Station has been, after a really brilliant renovation in the 1980s by a private company, has been sort of, it's divided between Amtrak, which administers the tracks and part of the station, and then this private company that dealt with the front, and something else that dealt with the portico outside. But in fact, under federal law, Union Station is a property of the United States, of the government of the United States, and that these arrangements were made to facilitate its renovation, improvement, and better management. And Union Station has become a garbage dump and a horrible place. And Sean Duffy announced that that the federal government was going to take administrative authority over it and run it better than it had been run before. I see here that AP has put out a bulletin. Trump extends control over Washington by taking management of Union Station away from Amtrak. That is AP's, bulletin line. Now, this is why I say some fights are not going to take. Because first of all, that's nonsense. He's not taking anything. The federal government owns Union Station. We, the taxpayer, the American taxpayer, owns Union Station. It is a federal property that has been managed in complicated ways. Amtrak, which is a weird private-public company, and various other things. There is going to be an effort all day to say Trump is now seizing control of the transportation hubs in the United States so that when he needs to stop all the trains during his coup in 2029, that is not going to take. That's what I mean. Like stuff like that. When
If
you go,
Sean Duffy
Yeah.
wants to take control of Amtrak itself,
yeah,
I would be delighted.
right. So I'm just saying, like there are fights that will and will not take. It really isn't like you can. They're going to try to make a fight over this and say that this somehow connects to the firing of Lisa Cook at the Fed, and I don't know, and the Bolton and
I
the
saw my
Bolton
first National Guardsman today on the way to work.
Mhm.
I've been looking for them on my daily commute
Mm-hmm.
for over a week, and I finally saw some here in DuPont Circle. So that's part of the
I would
creeping
like to, by the way,
militarization as well.
Matt Lewis, whom I really like, conservative commentator, went on Twitter yesterday. There was a picture of the National Guardsman going down an escalator somewhere.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't like this. This doesn't look like America to me, or this is happening in another country. And I live in New York. I've lived in New York for the last 25 years. Whenever I see some kind of armed presence in Times Square, on a subway platform, somewhere else,
Penn Station.
I am happy because it means something bad went on and somebody moved forces in place to stop whatever bad was going on from happening.
The Guard has been in Penn Station for 25 years.
I do not think that a show of order in the nation's capital, which is also the seat of the Pentagon, that a show of order is an act of fascism. I'm sorry. Maybe, I'm not libertarian enough to look at it that way. And I sort of understand, but that's again like the fight that doesn't take in the way that people who want to have the fight want it to take, because there are two ways of looking at that. One of which is it's really sad, maybe, that schools have to have magnetometers in them, right? There was a whole thing when they started putting magnetometers in school entrances. This is terrible that we live in a society where there are magnetometers at school entrances. And you could say, yeah, it is terrible, but what's better, to have the magnetometer or to not have the magnetometer? If one passive way of preventing horrible actions is to make sure that people don't walk into the building with a weapon that can be detected by a magnetometer, you have increased the pacific quality inside a school. If you're in Washington, D.C., and there's a show of orderly force that reduces crime and makes life more livable, that is not fascism. It was libertinism that led to the fact that people felt free to commit crime and felt like they were not at risk of being punished for it. In D.C., Zohar Mamdani here in New York has literally declared his intention, it's not really his power to do so, to seek the ending of misdemeanor arrests or charges. All misdemeanor arrests or charges. Think about what that means. That is a present idea that is moving into the mainstream of the Democratic Party, which is why we should move on to the Democratic National.
I just want to amend my comment.
Okay. Yeah.
Not every fight will take. Fair. Every culture war fight will take.
Okay.
Every culture war fight that Chris Rufo pays attention to.
Absolutely.
Take.
Yes.
I'll agree with you there for sure. But the DNC is important, because I think your comments about the creeping fascism and the charges that Trump is a dictator, are more and more just standard Democratic Party rhetoric. And as I've been listening to what the goings on at the Democratic National Committee's meetings this past week, I've been struck by how everyone, from the chairman of the party to the politicians, including the Governor Pritzker of Illinois, of course, Governor Walz of Minnesota, just state outright: Trump's a dictator, Trump's a fascist, the Republicans are part of this authoritarian putsch or coup that's taking place before our eyes. And there the argument stops. There's really nothing else they have to say, because their entire line now as a party is that the incumbent power is fascist.
Okay, so they're doing the fascist thing, and then there was this big fight over Israel, which is this focus of the news stories today, where again we have this like divide where young activists wanted the DNC to approve a resolution calling for an arms embargo on Israel, and DNC chairman Ken Martin and the old guard of the DNC did not want this and passed a different kind of resolution calling for a humanitarian surge of aid into Gaza, and there should immediate ceasefire and all the hostages being returned, a kind of like the fantasy position. Everything should just all end, and all the hostages should be home, and all the Gazans should be fed, and lemonade, the ocean should turn to lemonade, and that would be wonderful. And that passed, and then they had to take up this secondary effort to impose an arms embargo on Israel. And the articles that I've read have all said, this is a generational split, that it's young Democrats, this young Democrat, that young Democratic organization. That resolution was sponsored by a 25-year-old who runs the Young Democrats for Democratic Youngness and all of that. And this fight is talk about the culture war. So Democratic Party is staring down the barrel of a massive deficit in voter registration, with Republicans registering voters at a higher rate. More people now say they are Republican than Democrat, pretty much for the first time, not only in my lifetime, but I think maybe going back to the New Deal. And they're trying to figure out how to navigate practically in this atmosphere. And what the young people and the activists in the party say is, what you need to do is go hard left, particularly on Israel. Go as hard left as you possibly can, because you have an enthusiasm gap, and that's where all the enthusiasm is. And in any case, it's right and you're wrong, and it's all part of not fighting with Trump and all of that. And it's weird because as this is going on and all these troubles are taking place, there are little signs of there are green shoots for Democrats. There was a state Senate election. Now, of course, my brain is frizzled, so I can't. In Iowa, where a Democratic state senator won in a special, and ended the supermajority of the Republican Party in the Iowa State Senate, which means that they can't just pass legislation at will.
And it was a Trump plus 11 district.
Right. So that's a green shoot in this sense, which is that, maybe the Republican enthusiasm, the gap between Democratic and Republican enthusiasm, is so focused on Trump himself personally that if he's not on the ballot, or if there isn't a major candidate on the ballot, these new Republicans, or these excited, Trump plus 11 people, don't come out to the polls.
The Democrats are excellent at winning special elections. They have almost an unbroken record over the past 5 years of winning special elections. Mm-hmm. The other elections, not so good.
Right. But 2022 Senate, the National Senate map in 2022 did not go the Republicans' way.
It didn't.
The way we expected it to. So, it's a mixed story, but I'm just saying, at this moment of Democratic low ebb, while they're having this fight about how terrible they're doing and they need to do better, they win this special in Iowa, and I don't know, like the idea that in the middle of this trouble, and I'm not even sure that saying that Trump is a fascist is a bad message for them. Maybe it's a good message for them. I don't know, but like dwelling on Gaza.
Well, so that's the thing. I mean,
I'll
there's a
dwell on
couple.
Gaza. We're commentary. I dwell on Gaza. We are a publication that centers on questions relating to Israel and the United States and Zionism, and we are a publication of the 2% of the United, that grows out of the 2% of people in the United States who are Jewish and have an interest in these matters, as well as a lot of other things. But the entirety of the Democratic Party focusing its attention on this faraway war involving people they've never met that they could not point to on a map. That is
Can I say
very
something about this?
weird.
Because I wrote about this
Yeah.
yesterday, and there's a couple points to make. The first is that when I wrote about this yesterday, I compared it to what happened in 2012 at Obama's renomination convention in North Carolina, where Democrats had pulled God and Jerusalem from the platform and then force fed it back in. And one of the things to note is that Antonio Villaraigosa, the mayor of LA, who was the master of ceremonies on stage calling for the vote, he overrode, they asked for a vote to put Jerusalem and God back in, and the vote obviously lost. The floor was very loud. The delegates were against it. And he said, a motion passes. And he did this thing where he was looking off stage, right? And Abe, I quoted Abe's, piece from that time from 2012, where Abe said he had to go, he looked like an actor suddenly running off script, because that's exactly what he was. But that was 13 years ago, and the end result was the Democrats they did it anyway. And they did it at Obama's direction, right? Obama said, I don't want headlines with the word godless out of my renomination convention, okay? Keep the words godless Democrats out of the press, please. Can you just do me this favor? Because he didn't necessarily disagree with the point, but he was focused on what it looks like. So Obama says, put God back in, God lives, and they did, and they won the election. Okay, that was a top-down situation of Democrats recognizing that some of this was going too far and ordered it to be moderated for the sake of winning an election. What happened yesterday? Ken Martin, the DNC chair, supported one resolution, a moderate resolution that called for a two-state solution. This other activist put forth one that called for an arms embargo and didn't mention Hamas and didn't blame Hamas. Martin wins. The establishment wins. And he pulls his own resolution after he won. Okay. This is a huge change to understand about the culture of Democratic Party activists and the relationship between the establishment and the base, which there isn't really an establishment and a base anymore, is the final lesson in this, which is that back then they had to shout down the activists and order them to get in line and fight with them over it, and they did it. And this time they won. The establishment won, but they couldn't deal with the backlash to winning. And so he pulled it and he said, I'm going to have a task force and we're going to figure out we have to speak with one voice. Now, as I mentioned in the post, you have to think that Ken Martin has kind of lost his mind, because he went into this with two resolutions and he only supported one of them. What did he expect would happen? If you're Ken Martin, the best case scenario happened, right? Everybody did as you said. You're the chair. You said do this and the party did that. And now he runs away with his tail between his legs. But the other thing is that the resolution that will ultimately be passed is going to be more anti-Israel as a result of this, because the people who are willing to give were the people who didn't support that second resolution because they had minor complaints about it, such as if you put Hamas in the resolution, or something about the hostages, some token thing, we will support it. And therefore, you can probably expect a resolution that speaks about an arms embargo passing or something like it. And that is the change in a little more than a
Yeah.
decade in the Democrats and their interaction with the base and their fear of the base.
I mean, a lot of these resolutions will seem small beer when Zoran Mamdani is elected mayor of New York City,
Right.
and you have this extremely
Well, Matt-
anti-Israel, anti-Semitic figure as the face
Right.
of the party.
So you weren't on the show yesterday, and I said, and I think that this is highlighted by what happened here, that this November election may have a very key, for an off-year election, very key set of messages that will be delivered by the three major elections, right? Which is the mayoralty of New York City and the gubernatorial elections in Virginia and New Jersey. And Virginia and New Jersey have the Ken Martins, basically candidates, the sort of the ones that seem to be acceptable and want to be able to get votes in the middle from independents and all of that. And then Mamdani, of course, being the candidate who was running as on the most distinctly left-wing platform for a major and likely winning candidate in American history. Nothing like it ever before, particularly given the almost open anti-Semitism, which you connect to that. And if Spamberger and Spamberger and Cheryl lose, the Democrats in Virginia and New Jersey, I said yesterday, and Mamdani wins, Ken Martin's disappear, and the story of the Democratic Party will be the vanguard, as happened in 71, 72, and has happened before, will take the party over, just as the Tea Party took over the Republican Party. And what the consequences of that will be are very, very parlous. Even on one hand, you could say, "Oh, great, I'm a Republican. This is going to be great. They're terrible, and nobody likes them, and they're crazy, and they're going to lose all these elections." And on the other hand, like, if one of the two major American parties is taken over by socialist anti-Semites who want to destroy our one ally in the Middle East, who ended up in a war because they were attacked by a terrorist squad that killed and injured 5,000 people in a single morning, and that is now held to be an act of injustice. We're going into very dark times. And if you are going into a dark time, I just want to talk to you for a second about our friends at St. John's College, because a St. John's education may be the answer to how to survive and thrive and change things in a dark time. Because what kind of education does a free society require? At St. John's College, students study the great books of Western civilization, where they learn to think independently, hear others' perspectives, and understand the foundations of democratic society. It's an education for citizens, thought leaders, and those who will carry forward the best of the American tradition. Their BA is equivalent to a double major in philosophy and the history of math and science, and a double minor in literature and classical studies. It's demanding. It's not for everyone. It might be just right for your child. Learn more at sjc.edu. So
my only quick response, John,
Yes.
to your point, which I didn't hear yesterday, is that it's pretty early to tell. And you're right, that could be the big lesson if the scenario you laid out happens. But, the most likely scenario is, in fact, that all three win: New York, New Jersey, and Virginia, the Democrats. And so what you'd have is the status quo, which is a kind of decadent Democratic establishment that is increasingly pressured by a socialist, anti-Semitic left wing. And that will play out over the course of the 2028 cycle. I think one other element of the party meetings, which we should just mention briefly, is the party is beginning the process. The Democratic Party is beginning the process of deliberating over whether to correct for Biden's ridiculous change in the primary schedule. Remember, Biden basically forced the Democratic Party to de-emphasize Iowa and New Hampshire, traditionally the first in the nation caucus and primary, in order to go with South Carolina as the first nominating contest. Biden did this for a couple reasons. One is he always did poorly in Iowa and New Hampshire, and so he was quite justifiably afraid that he would lose both those contests as an incumbent president, and that would spell doom for, of course, his inevitably doomed candidacy anyway. And then there was the PC element to it. Iowa and New Hampshire, majority white states, and in the post-George Floyd Democratic Party, this was viewed as part of America's systemic racism, and hence the Democrats wanted to prioritize South Carolina, which has, of course, a huge black Democrat voting population. But I think this was kind of like the Cracker Barrel experiment. It was a change that really was unnecessary and done for kind of vaguely selfish and identity politics reasons. And if the Democrats, I think, have their wits about them, they'll go back to the old calendar. And that, of course, would be also a way, I think, to potentially, actually, it may end up highlighting the progressive, the socialistic side, because those candidates tend to do better in the early states. It would actually be better for the Ken Martins and the Democratic establishment to keep South Carolina at number one, because the black voters of South Carolina are traditionally averse to either progressive technocrat dweebs like Pete Buttigieg or crazy lunatic anti-Semitic socialists like Bernie Sanders.
Can I make another point about this, which is, there is this continuing House investigation into the question of whether or not people really on the auto pen and stuff like that, whether people in the White House knew that Biden was infirm and had covered it up and had lied about it, or had taken, unconstitutional control of the levers of the executive branch. And I think that the decision to futz around with the schedule may be a kind of analogical proof that they did know, because when would you have expected that Biden would face a challenge in 2024 like that? There was no reason to think that Biden would face a challenge in 2024. He had united the party. He had passed all this leftist legislation that people liked. People were defensive of him and all of that. They needed to change the schedule because there could have been an opportunistic connection made between the ability to get out this progressive vote in these two small states that had never really liked him, and an argument that he could no longer serve as president, that you were not just doing it for ideological reasons, you were doing it for practical and constitutional reasons. And by closing that opportunity off, the only Democrat who ran against Biden in 2023 was Dean Phillips. Right. But imagine a world in which Iowa and New Hampshire were in fact in play as the nominating powers, and you could have had a Buchanan-like person, nearly knocking George H.W. Bush off in New Hampshire in 92. And of course, Gene McCarthy doing the same to Lyndon Johnson in 1968. McCarthy knocked Johnson out of the race. Bush stayed in the race and lost. I don't know. I think that that's a big thing that we have sort of let go.
Well, and also
they found it necessary to think
the attempt to strong arm all potential opponents, eventually forcing RFK Jr. from the Democratic Party.
Right.
That didn't really work out well in the end either. But yes, these moves were happening long before that debate in June.
2 years before.
June 2024, when, according to the media, that's when people discovered.
Oh my God!
What's wrong with Biden? We never had no idea.
Yeah,
they had an idea.
Yeah. Okay, we'll leave it there. So till tomorrow, for Matt, Abe, and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.